Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. This is Pensions Module Get Started and my name's Duncan. So I'll be your host and presenter and I am joined today by my colleague Alice, who's standing by in the background ready and waiting to answer any questions. Let's now take a look at what we'll cover in this webinar. So we'll start with an introduction, giving you a reminder of your employer auto-enrollment duties, and then an overview of the pensions module and how that can support you with complying with those duties. We're then going to take a closer look at setting up the pensions module. So we'll be looking at this for a brand new payroll, taking on their first employees, and also how to set up the module if you are an existing payroll but were previously not using the pensions module. Once we've been through the setup and a quick look at the settings, we'll then have a look at how you would use the pensions module, so where this fits into your pay run, and a very brief demonstration of where to find and run the main pension module options. And then we're going to finish with some further support, telling you more about the other webinars in this series, how to access our help centre, and more. So let's move straight on to our introduction, and we're going to start this session with a reminder of your employer auto-enrollment duties. Now, every UK employer now has a duty to put eligible staff into a qualifying pension scheme, and those duties begin the moment that you take on your first member of staff. Now, as part of this, you'll need to choose and set up a qualifying pension scheme. You will need to work out which of your employees are eligible to be put into that pension, known as assessing those employees. You have a duty to write to your staff so that they're aware of how auto-enrollment affects them, and you need to declare your compliance with the pensions regulator within 5 months of that initial duties start date. Now, once you've completed those duties, you then have ongoing responsibilities. And these involve assessing your employees' age and wage in each pay period and identifying then if there are any employees who now need to be enrolled into your pension scheme. Now that task can either be done manually or you can use the pension assessment, which is one of the main features of the pensions module. You need to ensure that you are paying into the pension scheme. So making sure you are contributing the minimum contribution as an employer and that the total minimum contribution is met and paid over to your pension provider. You need to manage requests from employees to join or leave the scheme, known as opting in or opting out, and keep records of such requests. And then every 3 years, you have a duty to carry out re-enrollment, which will involve putting employees who left or opted out of your pension scheme back in, and then giving them the option to opt out again if they want to come out again. And we do cover re-enrollment duties as a separate webinar as part of these series. So the reason we have recapped these auto-enrollment duties is that the pensions module is designed to help you automate many of these duties and to essentially make your life easier when it comes to complying. Now, the pensions module consists of 3 main areas. You have the pension assessment, which is involved in assessing employees' age and earnings each pay period. So you can monitor whether there's been a change to a status and employees who become eligible to be put into the scheme. There's a send pension data option, which will make it easier for you to send the required information to your pension provider. And there are various different ways you can manage this with the pensions module. And again, we cover that in more detail in a separate webinar. And there's the send pension correspondence option, which deals with all the communications that need to be sent to employees at the point they join your company or when they're put into the pension scheme. And you'll get a flavour of some of these options towards the end of today's webinar once we've set up the module. Now, at this point, you might be wondering whether or not you have the pensions module and whether that's included in your subscription or license. And there is a pretty simple way to check if you've got it. So if you try to access any of the pensions module options, such as the pension assessment, if you don't have it included in your license, you'll see the message on the right-hand side of this screen asking for you to subscribe. Now, if you do have the pensions module and you were to go into pension assessment, at that point, it would prompt you to back up your data. And then it would then take you into the pension assessment if everything's been set up, or it'll take you into the pensions module setup wizard if it hasn't yet been set up. And we've actually linked to an article which explains where you can check if you have the pensions module included in your license if you are at all unsure. So that's just a little bit of background on auto enrolment and the pensions module. But what I'd like to go into next is the setup process. So we're going to look at this from two different angles. So first of all, we'll take a look at setting up for a new company. So this is a payroll that has taken on their first member of staff, or perhaps a payroll that has transferred. So from one PAYE scheme to another, effectively giving your employees a new start date and then a new duty start date for that new PAYE scheme. And then we'll take a look at the process for setting up for an existing company that had not previously been using it. So I think the best way to show you this is to dive straight into a demo. So what I'm going to do is just bring these slides down. And I'll take you straight into payroll. And just to set the scene here, this is a brand new payroll. So I've got 5 employees starting employment for this new employer on the 1st of June. So the 1st of June is my duties start date. And at this stage, I've already set up my employee records, as you can see here in the employee list. And I've set up the pension scheme, the qualifying pension scheme that they're going to be enrolled into. One of the key things to understand when using the pensions module is that the process of assigning a pension scheme is now handled by the pension assessment option. So although I've set up my employee records, and I'll just show you an example of the record here. So the employee started on the 1st of June, 2026. At this point, there is no pension scheme assigned to their record. And I'm not going to assign this manually because from this point onwards, I'm going to be using the pensions module to manage enrolling my staff. Now, you can see that I've already set up my pension scheme. I just have one scheme for this particular payroll, and you'll see that I have ticked the box to say that it's a qualifying scheme for automatic enrolment, and that means this can be chosen as my default auto enrolment pension scheme used by the pensions module. If you do have more than one pension scheme, it is possible to set up exceptions to the default, and we'll go into that in a bit more detail later on in the demo. So I've got my employee record set up, I've got my pension scheme set up, and before I go into the pensions module settings, I'm just going to set my process date to my duty start date. So in this case, it was the 1st of June. This was the date that I took on my first employees. And then to access the pensions module setup, I would go to my company tasks here on the left-hand side, and then I would select pensions module settings. Now, as you can see, I am being prompted to take a backup, and we would strongly recommend that you take a backup before completing the setup process. So I'll go ahead and click yes and run through the backup wizard. And of course, you can rename this backup so that you know exactly when it was taken. So that is my pre-pensions module setup backup. I've now got a point I could restore back to if I need to start again. And once that backup's complete, I'm now into the pensions module setup screens. Now, first thing I need to do is to enter my duty start date. And as a brand new payroll, this is the date I took on my first employee. So within this box, I'm going to enter the 1st of June, 2026. And then to continue, I'll click Start. Now you'll now see 3 steps to set up your payroll software. And if you do have multiple payroll usernames, there'll be an extra step where you can configure permissions for each payroll user to access the pensions module features and settings. But for me, I'll need to configure my pension schemes, which will be setting a default auto-enrollment scheme, check my pay element settings to ensure that the appropriate pay elements are set up as qualifying earnings, and finally, flag any non-UK workers who would be excluded from auto-enrollment. And for each of these steps, you would select the Do It Now option, and when you've completed the step, you'll be able to tick the box. So let's start with step 1, configure your pension schemes. I'll just maximize this screen to give you a closer look. So this will show me all of the pension schemes that have been set up. So I just have one main scheme that I'm using. You can see that no employees are assigned to this scheme at this stage because this is a brand new payroll. It's a qualifying scheme that uses qualifying earnings for pensionable pay, and I've already entered my pension provider reference. Now this will become my auto-enrollment default scheme. So all I need to do is to select this box on the right-hand side. I will then be able to save this setting, and then I can mark that step as complete. Second step is to review my pay element settings. Now this is specifically for the qualifying earnings setting, which are the payments that are used in pension assessments. So when I click on to Do It Now, it's going to show all of my current payments. So I've got one for basic, overtime, and bonus. And I also have a non-taxable payment that I use to reimburse expenses. Now, as a general rule, anything subject to tax and national insurance also counts towards qualifying earnings. And for that reason, I flag my basic, overtime, and bonus payment as qualifying. But the expenses payment does not count towards qualifying earnings, so I haven't got that box ticked. So at a glance, I can check that the correct pay elements are set up as qualifying earnings. If I'm happy with these settings, I would click on to save. Then, of course, we can mark that second step as done. Now, the third step is to confirm if any of your employees are classified as non-UK workers for auto-enrollment purposes. So these are employees who don't work in the UK or don't ordinarily work in the UK, but are still employed by you. And if you do have any such workers that you need to exclude from auto-enrollment, you would simply select the non-UK worker checkbox. In this particular example, all of my employees are UK workers, so I'm going to leave these boxes cleared and then go ahead and click Save. I'm going to mark that final step as complete, and you'll see I'm now available to move on to my next step. Now, this second step is a bit of a throwback to when auto-enrollment was brought in for existing employers at their staging date, and it allowed those employers to write to their employees, introducing them to auto-enrollment and to let them know that that was upcoming. So it's not really used these days. So what you would need to do for this step is to simply mark it as done. Click on to Next, and that is the setup complete. Now you do still have an option of producing a letter introducing auto-enrollment to your employees. It's not mandatory, not one of your employer duties to send that particular letter, but it's now found within the reports menu. So we're all now set up for auto-enrollment, and we can click on to Finish. And because we've completed that setup wizard, I'm now able to go back in to my pensions module settings. And instead of taking me through that wizard, I can just review my duty start date. I can check my default auto-enrollment scheme. And I would also recommend at setup, just going into your phasing settings. And all this does is it will just verify that your pension schemes meet the minimum requirements in terms of pension contributions under the current legislation. So you then tick the box, confirming you've read the message, and you would click OK. So these are our pensions module settings, and we will come back to these a little bit later on in the demo. So everything is now set up in terms of the pensions module for this brand new payroll. When it comes to processing my first pay run, which will be on the 30th of June for these employees, I would then be able to go into my pension assessment option, and that is when these employees would be newly enrolled, automatically enrolled, if they're eligible, into the pension scheme. So that was the process for setting up for a new company. I will just recap those steps on screen with you. So once you've taken your backup and you're into the pensions module setup process, first thing you would do is to confirm your duty start date, which for a new company is the date you took on your first employee. Your second step was confirming your default auto-enrollment pension scheme, checking your pay element settings and flagging the appropriate payments as qualifying earnings and flagging any non-UK workers. And then that third step was informing your employees. So for this one, just mark it as done. But if you do want to find that original auto-enrollment introduction letter, it is now available from the main reports menu in the employee folder. So let's now move on to the other scenario. So this is where you're setting up the pensions module for an existing company. So it's already established, and up until now, you've been managing your auto-enrollment duties manually, or perhaps by using a third-party system. So we're going to take you through the steps now of setting up the pensions module for an existing company. So let's just switch back to the demo. And I'm going to log into a different payroll. So this is actually an existing payroll. They took on their first employee back in April 2024. And up until now, we've been managing all the auto-enrollment duties manually. So doing manual assessments and manually assigning the pension schemes. But we've now taken out a subscription to the pensions module and we want to start using that. So we now need to fill in some of the gaps so that the pensions module knows what's happened up until this point. So just like before, to get into the pensions module setup wizard, I'm going to start from the company tasks and I'm going to go into pensions module settings. Just like before, we strongly recommend that you take a backup at this point. So I can go in, take my backup, give the backup file a name, and that's my safety net if I need to start this process again. That then takes us into the first setup screen. But the difference here is when it asks me for my duty start date, I would put my original duty start date or staging date if I was an employer before 2017, which in this example was the 1st of April 2024. And then when I click on to start, because that is a historical date, I then need to confirm what's happened between then and today. So what I've been doing is assessing my employees manually using another system. I can then go ahead and click continue. It's then going to give me a warning telling me that it's my responsibility to ensure that information entered in this process is accurate. So we'll go ahead, tick the box and click continue. And that then takes us into the setup steps. Now, these steps are the same as it would be for a new payroll. So first of all, we configure our pension schemes. You can see this time, got a couple of pension schemes that I could use. So my default scheme is going to be this Nest pension, which already has 5 employees assigned to it. So I'm going to mark that as the default. But this other scheme, my director's pension, is a scheme that I might want to use for any new directors that I take on when they get automatically enrolled. And I'm going to show you how you can set an exception to the default scheme a little bit later on. So I've chosen my default scheme and I can mark that as done. And then just as before, I can review my qualifying earnings. All of these count towards qualifying earnings. And if I have any non-UK workers, I can flag them in this screen. But in this example, I do not. Once these steps are complete, the next thing I need to do is to fill in some of that history. So this is the part where you are going to need access to some historical records so that you can provide information about what's happened up until now. And it is important that you take your time and enter the information accurately here, because this will then assign the appropriate auto-enrollment status, and it'll ensure things like re-enrollment in the future all happen correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and click Do It Now. And there's just a warning that we're going to make changes that can't be undone without restoring a backup. And that's why it's so important to take that backup at the start of the process. And then working through these steps, it's going to start by showing us employees who have no auto-enrollment pension history. And we just need to state the reason why that would be. Now, in this particular example, I do have an employee who was in the pension but opted out back in 2024, and that might have been before I started using Sage for my payroll, which is why there's no record of that in my program. So for employee 2 in this list, I'm going to say that they opted out or left. But for the rest of these employees, there's no other reason. They haven't opted out and they're not currently postponed for auto-enrollment. It's likely that they just don't meet the criteria to be auto-enrolled. So the option I'm going to choose for the rest of them is neither. So they haven't left, they're not currently postponed, so there's no reason in that list why they would have no auto-enrollment history. And that just means that they're going to get assessed by the pensions module, and if they do need to go into a scheme, that's when they would be enrolled. Now, for these next employees, these are all employees who are in a pension scheme, so they have an active qualifying pension scheme, and we need to state how that occurred and when they went into that scheme. Now, for all of these employees, they were auto-enrolled, so I could go through and I can select auto-enrolled from this list, or if you select them by ticking the boxes like so, you can assign the same status to all of them. So I know that all of these were auto-enrolled. It's already got their join scheme date from the pension scheme in their record, and we're also going to set that as their active membership date. And then in this third section, we need to provide details on employees who have left a pension scheme. So we've already indicated that employee 2 left, but we need to choose which scheme they were originally in, when they first went into that scheme. So again, you need to look back on your own records for this. I know that this employee joined on my staging date, or my duty start date, I should say, but they had then opted out. They did that on the 20th of April. I've tracked back on my records. And then for the other employee, because they do already have a pension scheme assigned, we already know their join and leave date. And again, they opted out or ceased membership of that pension scheme. So this is filling in the history. If you have said that anyone is postponed for auto-enrollment, you would class that as company postponement or individual postponement. Doesn't apply to any of these. And then we get a summary telling us that we have 4 employees that will be assessed just to monitor their status. We have 4 that are in a scheme, and they were all auto-enrolled in this example, and 2 who were not in a scheme because they opted out. Crucially, we now know when they opted out, so they can be correctly re-enrolled when our re-enrollment comes up. So I'm going to click on to save these details. You can print a copy of the key information if you wish to, but I'm just going to go ahead and click finish. So that's the big step for an existing company. I can now mark it as done. And the last thing I need to do is to send any historical pension correspondence. But in this case, we're not actually going to print the letters or send them. We are going to mark them as sent on a historical date. So when you go into this screen, it's going to pull out any of your employees that are in a pension scheme. It's going to show that they were due a job holder letter. So this is like an enrollment letter telling them that they've been enrolled because they're eligible. What we can do here is we can record the dates that these letters were sent if we want fully accurate records of when historical correspondence was sent. Or if you've got a larger payroll and you're going through the setup process, what some people choose to do is to record the sent on date as an arbitrary default date in the past, just to clear these letters from the historical pension correspondence. So it's up to you how you do it. I'm actually going to select them all, and I'm just going to enter a default date of the 31st of December of last year. Just because this is historical, I've already got records of when this was all done. We're going to select sent by user to say that the user sent these communications, and then we're going to simply click show as sent. And for these particular communications, they're all going to be recorded with a sent on date as the 31st of December, but I know that that was my default date, just to clear these letters and make them historical. So now that they are cleared, I can tick the box marking that step as done. I can click next, takes me to the final step, and then I click finish, which takes me back to payroll. What I can now do is I can revisit my pensions module settings. I can just check the phase-in settings, which automatically checks my pension scheme meet the minimum pension contribution levels. And then we've got our original duty start date, got our default pension scheme. You've got some postponement options. Now these are used to automatically choose a postponement date when you use the postponement option. And we go into that in more detail in our pension assessment webinar. And this is a section on the right-hand side where you can set up exceptions to the default scheme. So you'll have one main pension scheme, which will be your default auto-enrollment scheme. But if you have groups of employees that need to be enrolled into different schemes to this, if you organize them employees into a specific cost center or department, you can then set up your exceptions. So just to give you an example of this, I have grouped my employees by department, and I have set up a specific department for directors. So if I wanted an exception to the default scheme, I can add my directors department, and I can choose a different pension scheme to be the default. So now if I take on any new directors, or if an existing director becomes eligible, when they get auto-enrolled, they'll get put into this scheme rather than the company default. So I'm just going to go ahead and save these settings. And again, that is the pensions module set up for an existing company. So just to quickly recap these steps, we have linked to further guides in the handout. First step was to confirm the original duty start date or staging date, whatever that was in the past. It then asks you what you've done so far. So you select the option that you assessed manually using another system. You've then got the setup steps, choosing your default auto-enrollment scheme, configuring pay elements and checking non-UK workers. And then there's the step where you fill in some of the history for your existing staff. So it will display anyone without any pension history, and you need to say whether they've opted out of a pension, they're currently postponed, or neither. You'll then see a list of employees who do have an active pension scheme, and you'll say whether they were auto-enrolled into that scheme, they opted in, joined, or it was contractual. And then the third screen that pops up is for anyone who has left a pension scheme. So you would choose the opt-out option if they opted out of a qualifying scheme, and you would fill in the dates in which they did that. And then finally, you'll be prompted to record any historical auto-enrollment letters as sent. So you could record the original dates each communication was sent, or some people prefer to choose an arbitrary date in the past. So I chose the 31st of December just to mark all of those historical communications as sent. And then a reminder of those pensions module settings. You can review your staging or duty start date, make sure that's entered correctly. You've got your default auto-enrollment scheme that you'll enroll eligible employees into. You can set up exceptions to the default if you've organised your employees using cost centres or departments. And then there are default postponement periods that can be set for when you use the postponement option. And finally, something we'll cover in a separate webinar are the re-enrollment settings that are used when you do your cyclical re-enrollment, which is every 3 years. So now that we've got everything set up, we're just going to finish with a brief demo and explanation of where these new pensions module options will fit into your payroll process. So first of all, looking at the payroll tasks pane on the left-hand side, I have highlighted the pensions module options. So a couple of pre-update tasks would be to import pension updates if you've set up pensions data exchange to link directly to your pension provider, and that'll bring in any changes to pension schemes or any opt-out information sent over by your provider. You've then got the main option, the pension assessment, which is done directly after entering your employees' payments. So that will check everyone's age and earnings. And if there are eligible employees who are not already in a pension scheme and haven't opted out, they will be auto-enrolled. Once you've then done your reports and updated records, your post-update tasks involve sending pension data to your provider, reviewing the pension payments you need to make to your provider by running a report, and then sending any pension correspondence that's due to your employees. So let's try and put some of that together in our last demo. So we're going to go back to that company where we've just set up the pensions module. My next process date for these employees will be the 30th of June. And we have just taken on a new employee. And remember, once you start using the pensions module, you should not assign a pension scheme manually. So we do not have a pension scheme set. You let the pension assessment do this for you. You can see that this employee started work on the 8th of July. So they're going to need an assessment to see whether they need to go into the pension scheme. So let's assume for this demo that we've already entered all of the current payments for this period. And what I can now do is I can go into my pension assessment. So first of all, it will prompt me to take a backup, and we do strongly recommend that you take a backup at this point, just in case you need to undo anything that happens during the assessment. And once you've done that, that's then going to take you immediately into the pension assessment screen. A few things just to point out in this screen. So you've got the worker type column. Now it is the eligible type are the ones that need to be in a pension scheme because they meet the age and wage criteria. The other worker types are non-eligible or entitled. So these are employees that fall outside of the criteria to be automatically enrolled, but do have the right to opt in or join. You've then got your employees' auto-enrollment status. So to show you some examples here, our first employee was auto-enrolled back on the 1st of April because they are the right age and they're earning above the earnings trigger. Shows you the scheme they're enrolled into and also their pension contribution details. But then other statuses that we're seeing here are opt-out for those employees that we said have left the scheme. They've opted out until the next time we need to do our re-enrollment. And then those without a status are not in a scheme, and it will give you an indication why. So employee 5 is non-eligible. They're 19 years old, so they're not old enough to be auto-enrolled. They do earn enough, and they could ask to opt in if they wanted to. And then what you would see on the left-hand side are flags if there are any changes. But if it's your first ever pension assessment, and you've just completed the setup wizard, because this is the first time they're officially recorded as auto-enrolled, that's why we're seeing more flags than usual. But actually, employee 10 is a new starter. So they are being automatically enrolled this period. And looking at their details, you can see they've been enrolled as of their start date, which was the 8th of June. So this is what you would run after entering the employee's payments. We do cover this in more detail in our pension assessment webinar. And then you would complete your pay run as usual, running your pay slips and reports, and then running update records, which I'm going to skip ahead to now. And then once the records are updated, your pensions module tasks will be to send pension data to your provider. So for some providers, you can do this directly from Payroll. For others, you can generate a report to upload to your provider portal. You've got the review pension payments report, a really handy way of checking the total payments that are due to your pension provider. And the one we're going to go into here is sending pension correspondence. And this will show you any letters that need to be sent. Now, because I've just completed the setup wizard, you will see that there are some historical records. So some historical letters, some general notices that would have been sent at the original time. And then we've got a couple of letters that we do need to send. So the due by date is the clue here. So I've got a couple of letters that are due. The rest of these are all historical. So what I'm going to do first is just select all of the historical letters. And I'm going to enter a sent on date. Again, I'm just going to use the last day of 2025 for convenience. I'm going to show those as sent so that they are removed from this screen. And that then just leaves me with the letters that I do need to send, which is for my new starter who has met the criteria to be automatically enrolled. So just waiting for that process to complete. And what we can see here for our new employee is we've got a general notice and a job holder letter. So this goes to any new starter, just informing them about your auto enrollment duties. And this letter is specifically for employees that go into the pension scheme, just explaining to them why they've been put into the scheme, what their enrollment date is, and informing them about their right to opt out. So these letters can be printed, or if you've set up electronic documents, they can be emailed. We're going to record the sent on date, which in this case is going to be our June pay date. Then instead of showing these ones as sent, because they are current letters, I'm actually going to click send. That's then going to prompt me to print them out. So I've then got the letters that I can give to this new starter. It's going to cancel out for the purposes of this demo. And that will also attach a copy of this letter to the Documents tab of the employee record. So we can always view historical letters. We've got the ones that we've marked as sent. And we've got these current ones that we've actually printed out for our employees since we've been using the pensions module. And that is just a sneak peek at some of the main pensions module options. Just to recap those main points for you. So the pension assessment is used to identify eligible staff and assign them to a pension scheme, as it did for that new starter. Also used to process opt-in and opt-out requests and refunds where applicable, and it can be used to postpone enrolment for new starters or employees with a pay spike. Send pension data option we haven't looked at today, but we do cover this in a separate webinar. So for some providers, you can send pension data directly using Pensions Data Exchange. For all others, you can produce pension reports to the exact specification of that provider to enable you to easily upload the information to the provider's portal. And that last option that we did look at was send pension correspondence, enabling you to print or email pension letters. So types of letters are general notices for new starters, enrolment letters or job holder letters for employees going into the scheme, postponement letters if you choose to apply postponement, and re-enrollment for employees going back into the scheme on the 3-yearly re-enrollment. And that's how you're keeping records of all of the letters sent. So that brings us to the end of what we're going to cover in this session. Pensions module will get started, but just to mention some of the other webinars in the series, particularly related to today's session. So we've got pension assessment, gives you a deeper dive into the pension assessment option, covering things like opting in, opting out, postponement, and another look at pension correspondence. Send pension data runs through some of the options for sending data to your provider, including pensions data exchange, and pension re-enrollment shows you how you can use the pensions module to manage your re-enrollment duties. In terms of the badge, to qualify for the badge, you need to attend 5 live webinars from the first 7, plus one of our quiz sessions. So you can see dates and times available on the slide there. They're all completely free to attend. Do make sure you sign up using the same email address for each session, and watching a recording does not count towards the badge. Badges will be sent following the end of the final session on the 8th of July. Further support can also be found on our help centre at sage.co.uk/help, also by clicking any of the help icons in your payroll software. Also got access to our Sage Assistant, giving you quick answers to your payroll questions. And one other training service I'd just like to call out is our personalised training. You can book one-to-one remote training with a Sage expert. These sessions are tailored to your requirements, providing clear solutions that you can apply immediately, giving you greater confidence and accuracy, and delivered remotely and conveniently from the comfort of your desk. Do check out some of the feedback we've had from those sessions, and if you'd like to inquire, all you need to do is to scan the QR code and complete our inquiry form, and a member of the team will be in touch within 48 hours. So for the last few minutes of the webinar, we're going to stick around just to ensure we've answered as many of your questions as possible. I'm going to go on to mute briefly just to help out with the Q&A, but you will be sent a recording of today's session later on today. So do look out for that landing in your inbox. And if you do want a copy of the handouts, don't forget to download them before you leave us. So as I say, I'll be going on to mute for just a few moments, and I will be back with you when we're ready to wrap this session up. So I'll speak to you soon. Hello again, everyone. Thank you so much for sending the questions through. I think we've managed to get answers out to most of them, so hopefully those answers are helpful to you. As we are pretty much out of time now, we are going to wrap the webinar up. So just a final opportunity to say thank you so much for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you on some of our other pensions module webinars in the near future. But it is goodbye for now.